Hey guys, tonight we write letters the way they were meant to be written, slow, deliberate, and with a very real chance of destroying everything you love with one careless twitch of the wrist. You settle in, the candlelight flickers, and the inkpot glistens like a dark pool of danger. You dip the quill in, and as you hover over the paper, time slows. You feel the potential. This is your message, your truth. But guess what? You probably won't survive this. Smudged ink is coming for you like a caffeinated raccoon with a vendetta. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You grip the pen. No, not a ballpoint. We're talking goose feather, trimmed just right, the kind that demands reverence and a steady hand. You feel like a monk in a scriptorium, minus the vow of silence and the lice. The ink smells faintly of rust and berries, which is disconcerting until you realize that's exactly what it should smell like: oak gall and iron salts, the classic cocktail of historical ink. A recipe that's lasted for centuries and ruined just as many sleeves. The first stroke bleeds a little. Not much, but enough for doubt to creep in. Are you holding it too tightly? At too steep an angle? Is the humidity off? Because yes, that matters. Ink, you're beginning to realize, is alive. It senses your fear. And like a cat on a freshly folded towel, it will sit exactly where it will cause the most ruin. Your hand hovers, and that's the danger. It's not the motion, it's the pause. That split-second hesitation as you gather your thoughts? That's when the droplet forms. Surface tension. Gravity. A single black tear rolls from the nib and hits your paper with the same finality as a meteor hitting a dinosaur. Historically, you wouldn't be alone. In the 13th century, monks chronicling sacred texts sometimes left cryptic apologies in the margins. I was cold. The ink froze. The scribe weeps. Some even scribbled angry footnotes blaming the curse of wet ink, or mice nibbling at the corners. Imagine preserving divine wisdom for eternity, only to have your final word blur into an accidental ink blot that looks vaguely like a turtle. You try to adapt. You start writing faster to outrun the ink, but it turns your elegant loops into jittery nonsense. Slow down, and it pulls. Speed up, and it scratches. There's no winning, only surviving. The trick, historians say, lies in rhythm, a kind of calligraphic heartbeat. Not too fast. Not too slow. A Goldilocks glide. And speaking of history, Leonardo da Vinci, the guy who invented more things than most of us have socks, was known to write backwards in mirror script. Historians still argue whether it was to prevent ink smudging with his left hand, or just a flex to annoy future researchers. But imagine the control it takes to write every line in reverse, with wet ink, in a world without correction fluid. You'd need nerves of steel and at least one lifetime of quiet contemplation. Or just be Leonardo. Back in your room, you exhale. You've barely made it through the salutation. Dear Beatrice. It's crisp. It's clean. But you're sweating. Because you know the danger's not over, it's only just begun. Every word is a landmine. Every pause a trap. You hold your breath for the next line. Ink has a memory. It remembers whether your nib was wiped. It remembers if you tapped the bottle too hard and now have a blob the size of Australia threatening to leak down your sleeve. It remembers the oils on your fingers. Touch the paper too soon, and the oils cause the ink to feather. Ever so slightly. Just enough to ruin the elegance you've been chasing since the first loop of the D. And then it happens. You shift your hand ever so slightly. Not a dramatic sweep, just a casual graze of your palm over the bottom of the page. And there it is, the smear. Faint, but irreversible. Like a shadow across a clean conscience. You've just created a modern tragedy with your own flesh. People often think the drama of letter writing lies in what you say. The confessions, the revelations, the poetic longing. But no, dear listener, the real drama is in the smudge. Because it tells the truth about you, your impatience, your pride, Your unwillingness to wait those extra 4 seconds for the ink to dry. Ink is a teacher. A cruel, ancient teacher with no tolerance for shortcuts. You can almost hear it whispering. Write again, mortal. This time with feeling. And maybe fewer oils on your hands. Still, you try again. New sheet. New hope. You shift your body, adjust the quill, and this time you hover an extra inch above the page. It's like disarming a bomb, but quieter. You catch yourself talking aloud. Slow, steady, no sudden moves. If anyone were watching, they'd assume you were performing surgery on a butterfly. And honestly, it's not that far off. You write. I have something to tell you, and I hope you'll believe me. It's perfect. You set the quill down, carefully, like it's a sleeping snake. You don't breathe. You just watch the words dry, molecule by molecule. It's oddly beautiful. Painful, but beautiful. 1 page down. 14 to go. And with each one, the risk of smudging returns, quietly, faithfully, like the world's most passive-aggressive ghost. You thought you had mastered it. You made peace with ink's temperamental nature, its slow-drying stubbornness, its aversion to human touch. But then, the quill. That beguiling feathered relic that everyone romanticizes until they're 3 blots deep and wondering if their letters should just be smoke signals instead. You pick it up again. This one looks regal. Goose feather, stripped and cut with what you think is the proper slant. It feels light in your hand, almost too light, like a fashion model on a windy day. You dip the tip in ink with reverence, and it spits. A tiny splatter arcs outward like an accusation. A dot lands right between believe and me from your previous sentence. Great. Now it looks like you're either shouting or swearing in Morse code. Turns out, quills were never easy. Not now, not back then. Historical scribes, those meticulous, ink-stained heroes, often spend more time sharpening their quills than actually writing. They used knives, hence the term penknife, to carve the nib just so. Too blunt, and the ink floods. Too sharp, and it scratches. Too splintered, and it becomes a weapon instead of a tool. Some medieval monks even kept a basket of trimmed quills at their side, each suited for a different line width. You, on the other hand, have one, and it's clearly plotting against you. You try again, this time cutting a bit off the nib with your desk scissors, which is like trimming a bonsai tree with a weed whacker. The next dip is better. The ink clings to the point, just enough. You bring it to the page and whisper encouragements like it's a horse refusing a jump. Easy now. Just a little why. No drama. But quills have moods. You can do everything right and still end up with a gush. One moment you're gliding smoothly, the next, it's a Rorschach test. You tilt the feather and pray like a student who didn't study. Please, just behave. Let's not forget, writers of the past trained for this. Literal calligraphy schools, apprenticeships, scriptoriums filled with inky-handed elders who'd slap your wrist if you smudged a single serif. These days, most people don't even hold pens properly. Your grip is already aching, your fingers cramp like you've been strangling a squirrel for an hour. Historians still argue whether certain ancient scripts evolved due to stylistic preference, or just because the writers had crummy tools. Was Gothic script really about aesthetics, or just a desperate workaround for blotty quills and scratchy parchment? Nobody agrees. But if your current letter ends up looking like an invitation to a vampire potluck, you'll blame the quill too. You make it through one line, then another. Your hand is trembling like you just defused a bomb with your teeth. You glance at the nib. It's starting to split. You can feel it dragging slightly, like a shopping cart wheel with an attitude. You pause. Should you recut it? Risk losing the fragile balance you've achieved? You flash back to an obscure historical tidbit you once read. The Emperor Charlemagne reportedly tried to reform handwriting across his empire. Not just the content of letters, but the form. He wanted everyone to write in a clean, legible script so future generations wouldn't have to guess whether a message said "send grain" or "start war." There was even a whole font named after the movement, Carolingian minuscule. Elegant. Balanced. Not a smudge in sight. If only you could channel that now. But instead, your quill snaps. Not dramatically, just the nib. A tiny fissure. Ink starts to drip where it shouldn't. You panic, grabbing a rag that's already soaked with previous disasters. You blot. You blot too hard. The paper wrinkles. The edge curls like it's trying to escape. The damage isn't catastrophic, but now your letter has a subtle tide mark running across its belly, as if someone tried to fax it underwater. You look at your fingers. They're stained black and trembling. And you still haven't finished the first paragraph. Of course, you could try another quill. You dig through your drawer and find an old one, a little frayed. You give it a hopeful trim. It works. Sort of. You manage another few lines. The words spill out like a confession. I didn't mean to lie. It just felt safer. Your handwriting is slanted and delicate, like it knows it's being watched. And here comes the punchline. Geese weren't even the only birds used for quills. Swans were popular, too, supposedly for fancy writing like titles and headers. Crows? Too stiff. Turkeys? A nightmare. Some daring souls even used all feathers, though good luck catching one without losing an eye. You imagine a medieval scribe with a bloody nose and a great story. Worth it. This all writes like a dream. But you? You just want consistency. You want your ink to flow, your nib to hold, your words to look like they weren't written during a mild earthquake. You remember something else. Before quills, people used reed pens. Ancient Egyptians wielded them to inscribe papyrus with eyeliner-thick strokes of carbon ink. Beautiful, bold, but prone to splintering. That's progress, you suppose, splinters to smudges. And yet, here you are, in the 21st century, voluntarily regressing through time. Writing with a feather. Chasing beauty with every loop of your pen. Risking it all for a clean line. You pause. The page before you is imperfect. A little blot at the top. A faint smudge near the margin. But there's also something kind of noble about it. Like you've entered into a centuries-old battle and earned your bruises. You consider leaving it as is. But no. You're not ready to surrender. You reach for a fresh sheet. Deep breath. Grip the quill. Just one more try. Fresh sheet. Deep breath. Same ink. New battle. You gently smooth the parchment with your palm. Not too hard, lest your skin oils turn the surface into a skating rink for rogue droplets. This one feels sturdier, thicker. You whisper a silent hope that maybe, just maybe, this page won't betray you like its predecessors. But it's already plotting. You dip the quill again, this time cautiously avoiding overfilling it. There's a sweet spot, and you're starting to learn where it lives, just enough ink to write a word or two, not enough to create a surprise inky lagoon. The line flows. The nib cooperates. I'm writing to you now because the silence has grown heavy. Not too shabby. You might actually be getting good at this. And then it starts. The slow, mocking curl of the paper. Not the whole page, just one corner. It lifts like it's trying to peek at what you're writing, or maybe just get away from you. You flatten it again, but the paper resists. There's moisture in the air. You glance at the window, fog on the glass, a soft drizzle outside. Of course. Your mortal enemy has returned. Humidity. You see, paper isn't passive. It's not just there, waiting for you. It absorbs everything: ink, oils, moisture, regret. And cheap paper, especially the kind you just grabbed without checking its weight or fiber content. That stuff's basically a sponge in disguise. Fun historical fact: the quality of paper has always been a social marker. In 18th century England, nobles used thick, creamy vellum or cotton rag paper. It held ink like a promise. The rest of society got the cheap pulp, made from recycled rags and sometimes literal garbage. The result? Letters that looked like they'd been sneezed on. You, clearly, have chosen the latter. It felt luxurious at first, a slight texture, a gentle off-white. But now, it's turning to mush under your wrist, the fibers swelling with invisible moisture. You lift the page and hold it toward the candlelight. There's a faint shadow, almost like veins in a leaf. Beautiful, but dangerous. That's the ink seeping, feathering into the paper's core. You haven't even smudged yet, it's doing the damage for you. You adjust your angle, thinking maybe if you hover your hand more, you can stay dry. But that makes your arm ache. You try writing faster, bad idea. The ink skips where the fibers have swelled. The silence has grown. What's that? Groaned? No. Groan. But the W looks like a very artistic spider just died on the page. Historians still argue whether some famous manuscript errors were actually spelling mistakes, or just bad paper and smudged ink. Shakespeare's folios, for instance, have entire lines that make zero sense unless you believe the scribe had a twitchy quill and a damp elbow. Was it genius? Or did he just sneeze mid-sonnet? We may never know. You place a blotting sheet over the page, a trick you read about online. It's supposed to lift excess ink gently without smudging. You pat it down like a newborn. But when you lift it, half a sentence has vanished. Apparently, this cheap paper's idea of holding ink is more of a gentle suggestion than a promise. Another page gone. You stare at your desk. Quill, decent. Ink, mercurial, but manageable. Paper? A traitor in disguise. You rummage through your drawer again, muttering. And there it is, a stack of paper that feels different. Heavier. Slightly yellowed. You run your fingers across the surface. Smoother. Firmer. Almost like cloth. Could this be the good stuff? You test it with a drop of ink. It beads, then soaks, slowly. No feathering. You press the drop with a fresh blotting sheet. Perfect lift. You feel like you've just discovered fire. Turns out, this is cotton rag paper, made from linen and cotton scraps, the kind favored by Renaissance artists and early diplomats. Michelangelo sketched the Sistine Chapel on paper like this. Benjamin Franklin penned letters warning of revolution on sheets this sturdy. Even pirates wrote treasure maps on this kind of stock, because if you're burying gold, you'd better use good paper. You line it up carefully. You check the nib. Steady. You check the ink. Still that same ominous glisten. You begin again. Sometimes I wonder if you ever think about those summers. The words emerge like a breath you've been holding. Clean. Sharp. The ink sits gently on the surface, giving you just enough time to blot. No smears. No smudges. You exhale so hard it ruffles the edge of the paper. You continue writing, the quill gliding. Every sentence flows better than the last. The page holds firm. Your wrist no longer burns from trying to hover like a stressed-out hummingbird. You start to enjoy it. And that's when it happens again. A bead of ink, unnoticed, clings to the side of the nib. You tilt the pen just slightly to form a loop. Gee! And it lets go. A fat teardrop hits the sentence like a meteor. The splash is almost artistic, an accidental flourish. But it turns gather into gather, as if your letter's been co-authored by a medieval poet with flair. You sit back, torn. It's not ruined. Not entirely. But it's not clean. And you realize that's the curse. The art of writing a letter without smudging the ink? It's not just technique, it's a dance with unpredictable tools and moody materials. Like building a house in a thunderstorm. Or baking a souffle in a volcano. And then there's the romantic tragedy of it all. You remember that 19th century love letter preserved in a museum. Delicate script, faint brown ink, and right in the middle? A clear fingerprint, slightly smudged. Historians believe it was the writer's own, possibly from tears. It adds to the mythos. Makes it human. Real. Maybe you don't need perfection. You stare at your smudged sentence, then the clean ones that followed. You've earned these stains. They're not flaws, they're proof you tried. A story in themselves. Still, you set the letter aside. You reach for another sheet. Because tonight, you're not done dancing with ink. You dip again. This time with a quill that feels broken in, obedient, like it knows what you've been through and doesn't want any trouble. The paper is that resilient cotton rag kind, and your confidence swells. But now your curiosity turns toward the ink itself. That mysterious liquid you've been relying on all evening, what is it really? The surface of the inkwell gleams like the eye of a raven. It looks inert. Still. But inside? It's a bubbling cauldron of chemistry, alchemy, and historical drama. You swirl it gently. It clings to the glass like molasses with a secret. Time to learn your enemy. Iron gall ink, your current tormentor, is a peculiar invention. It's made from oak galls, those strange tumor-like growths found on trees, usually caused by wasps laying eggs inside the bark. Lovely. You're basically writing with bug tumors. But mixed with iron salts and a dash of gum arabic, this inky brew becomes something magical. And volatile. Historians love it. Why? Because iron gall ink doesn't just sit on the paper, it bites into it. The acids etch the fibers, burning the words into place. This is why ancient manuscripts often remain legible for centuries, even as the paper crumbles around the script. But it's also why your desk might smell faintly of vinegar and sorrow. You lower your quill into the mix. The viscosity is perfect, slightly syrupy, like a potion. You imagine monks and revolutionaries doing the same, dipping carefully, hands shaking from excitement or fear or just too much caffeine in the form of mead. Quirky fact: during the Renaissance, ink recipes were so coveted that some scribes encrypted them. That's right, secret codes for ink. Some included odd additions like wine, cloves, or even egg whites. One recipe from 1624 suggests adding a drop of one's own blood for longevity. Bold move, especially if your letter's just a complaint to the bakery about stale rye. You write another line. It sings across the page. The truth, I think, is softer than we feared. A line like that deserves an ink worthy of Shakespeare, or at least someone who once read him and took notes in the margins. You glance at the drying trail. There's something satisfying in watching it change, from glossy wet to matte dry, as if the ink exhales too. But don't get cocky. Iron gall ink isn't stable. It keeps reacting for years. Some ancient documents now appear scorched, the text darkening and eating into the page like acid reflux on parchment. That's why preservationists freak out over ink corrosion. The very thing that makes your letter last might eventually devour it whole. Poetic, right? You pause and wonder, who was the first person who looked at a tree wart, a lump of iron, and a bottle of glue and said, "You know what this needs? Poetry." Historians still argue whether it was Persian chemists, Roman scholars, or just a very bored monk in Gaul who had access to too many trees and not enough conversation. Your ink tonight feels well balanced. But it is a homemade batch. You followed a recipe online, one that involved steeping crushed oak galls and rusted nails in vinegar. The kitchen smelled like an old sword had taken a bath in herbal tea. And now, every letter you write carries that tang of rust and botanical vengeance. You imagine your future recipient opening this letter. They'll smell it before they read it, a hint of forest, a flicker of iron, maybe even a whisper of mold. Because homemade ink is alive. Unlike ballpoint pens that die with a click, this stuff lingers, ages, evolves. And yet there's danger. The ink flows a little too freely now. You shake the quill lightly. A drop flies off and lands on your desk with a soft plop. You blot it before it stains. 1 minute too long, and it would have etched into the wood grain permanently, like a black birthmark. You shudder, remembering how many antique desks bear those scars, ghosts of letters long gone. You continue writing. It wasn't cowardice. It was timing. And timing is cruel. Your strokes are smoother now. You've adapted to the ink's rhythm. Each word feels intentional, almost sacred. But your hand tingles. You're gripping the quill too tightly again. You release, roll your wrist, stretch your fingers. Ink has taught you patience, but not posture. Your mind drifts to a fringe story you once heard, a 15th century Italian scribe who insisted that singing while preparing ink improved its quality. He believed the vibrations of his voice infused the liquid with harmony. His neighbors believed he was unwell. His letters? Gorgeous. Vibrantly dark. Scientists later claimed the humming likely warmed the mixture slightly, helping it emulsify better. Still weird. Still wonderful. You lean over your paper and whisper a note. Not quite singing, Just a hum, low and tuneless. The ink doesn't seem to care. But you do. It's grounding, this connection to a ritual. You're not just writing. You're crafting. And just like that, you make it through another paragraph. Your letter is growing. Not in length, but in weight. Each line pressed into the page like footsteps on soft earth. Your words are no longer floating. They're rooted. The ink stains your fingers, your breath smells vaguely metallic, and your desk now hosts a dozen practice sheets. Failures, all, but somehow, necessary. You blow gently on the newest line. Cruelty, after all, is rarely loud. It seeps. It's dry. Flawless. You press your palm against your chest. You feel calm. Like you've outwitted the ink, if only for a moment. You rest your quill on its holder, an old spoon, bent into a cradle, and lean back. The inkwell sits there, dark and unreadable. You swear it smiles. It knows you'll be back. You crack your knuckles, shake out your wrist, and reach for the page once more. The ink is drying like a dream, the quill is obedient, the paper a loyal companion. All signs point to triumph. But your body has other plans. Specifically, your palm. It's getting damp. Again. It's a subtle thing at first, just a little moisture pooling in the crease where your thumb meets your palm. But you feel it. That barely there film of sweat that signals betrayal from within. You wipe it discreetly on your sleeve, hoping to avoid another smudge-based meltdown. The problem isn't just emotional. It's biological. Human skin was never meant for fine calligraphy. Our fingers secrete oils, our palms sweat under pressure, and your hand, hovering anxiously over the page like a helicopter parent, is basically a sponge in denial. And the more you try to be precise, the more your body rebels. Hello, clammy hands? You try resting your pinky on a clean blotter, creating a buffer zone between you and the ink. It's awkward but effective, at least for the first few words. You told me silence was mercy. The ink glides. The letters shimmer. But you shift slightly to reach the next line, and SCHHK, your palm kisses the page. Just a whisper of contact, but enough. You lift your hand like it just touched a hot stove. A faint, murky smear trails the edge of a word, dragging the final Y into an indecisive tail. Not destroyed, but blemished. It looks like it sneezed. You exhale through your nose like a disappointed librarian. This again. There's an ancient tension at play here. All across time, sweaty palms have been the doom of beautiful writing. In the Middle Ages, scribes would bind their hands in cloth to prevent smudging and to preserve parchment. In 17th century Japan, some calligraphers worked entirely shirtless in cold rooms just to prevent sweat from dripping on rice paper. Hardcore. Historians still argue whether Leonardo's odd left-handed technique, writing backwards in mirror script, was an aesthetic decision, or just his attempt to prevent his southpaw from dragging ink through his work. Some suggest he even designed writing desks with tilted surfaces for better air circulation. Was he a genius, or just really tired of damp knuckles? Possibly both. You start experimenting. You wedge a thin sheet of paper between your hand and the writing surface, a barrier of decency. It works, until the paper slides. Now your D looks like a sloppy B. You try again, this time anchoring the buffer paper with your pinky like a human paperweight. It's a delicate operation, equal parts surgery and origami. Then the candle flickers. Just once. A gust of wind sneaks through a crack in the window. Your paper flutters, your balance shifts, and your hand presses into a not quite dry line. You pull away instinctively, leaving a Rorschach-esque smear that resembles a hedgehog with an opinion. You consider gloves. You remember seeing a photo of Mozart's handwritten compositions, the staff lines perfectly preserved, and wonder, did he have dry hands? Or was he just a sorcerer with good parchment? You rummage through your drawers and find an old pair of cotton gloves. They were meant for handling photographs or polishing silverware, but tonight they're armor. You slip one on your writing hand. It feels silly, theatrical, like you're about to perform a mime routine instead of penning your personal manifesto. But it works. The glove absorbs the sweat, shields the paper, gives you a false, but blessed, sense of control. You write another line. I stayed quiet because I was afraid of what the noise would reveal. No smear. No drag. It's almost boring how well it goes. You miss the drama. A quirky note. During the 1800s, upper-class letter writers often used scented gloves while writing, infusing their correspondence with subtle perfumes. Letters didn't just speak, they smelled. Lavender. Rosewater. Even tobacco and cedar. Imagine receiving a note that carried the ghost of someone's touch and their favorite cologne. Wildly romantic. Or incredibly invasive, depending on the person. You briefly consider spritzing your own letter with something aromatic, but then remember the ink's fragile ego. One unexpected splash of cologne and you'll be back to sobbing over, "Dear Beatrice," for the 5th time. Instead, you focus. The glove works. The ink cooperates. Your words stretch across the page like dancers, fluid, synchronized, almost smug. But then, heat. It creeps into the room, barely noticeable at first. Just a warm patch along your neck. But soon, your whole back is sweating. The glove absorbs some of the moisture, but now your whole arm is betraying you. You realize that your writing ritual has become an exercise in full-body sweat management. You fan yourself with a discarded sheet. You crack the window further. A moth drifts in and does a figure 8 around your candle before bouncing gently off your nose. You sigh. This is your life now. Still, the letter grows. The sentences build. The ink dries. The words have weight. I think love is quieter than we expected. You stare at the page, fingers hovering, afraid to breathe on it. You lean back, holding the glove away from the desk like it's radioactive. You let the air move. You wait. And then you hear it, the softest sound in the world, the whisper of ink drying. Not literal, of course. But it's there, in the hush, in the stillness. Like paper exhaling. Like the moment before truth becomes permanent. You carefully peel off the glove. Your hand is pale and slightly pruny, but dry. Victorious. You flex your fingers. You survived the damp hand disaster. For now. You've survived sweat, paper rebellion, and quill drama. Now comes a new battle, time. You watch the last sentence you wrote, bold and intact, as it quietly rebels against your desire for speed. The ink glistens. It taunts. You know not to touch it. You've learned. And yet, the urge. That sneaky, whispering urge to get on with it. You wait. 5 seconds. 10. And then, without thinking, you tilt the page slightly, just to admire the curve of the last S. And disaster. The ink slides? Barely. But enough. One modest drop turns into a snail trail. The loop collapses inward like a balloon deflating. There it is, the deadly flaw of impatience. You bite your lip and lean back, arms crossed like a disappointed schoolteacher. You stare at your own foolishness. How many times will you do this to yourself? Ink needs time. Time you won't give it. Time you pretend you're giving it while you fiddle with your sleeve and eye the next sheet like a caffeinated octopus. But here's the truth, drying ink is an art. Not a passive wait. Not just leaving the page and praying. A strategy. And back in the day, writers had strategies. They weren't just sitting there with their thumbs up their frocks. Blotting paper, for example. Not just for messy schoolboys. It was prized, preserved, even embossed with gold by rich correspondents. It came in scented varieties too, like lavender-scented blotters that smelled like a grandmother's wardrobe. Proper technique meant placing the sheet gently over the ink, no sliding, no pressing like you're trying to suffocate a spider. You try it now. Soft touch. Lift. Success. Sort of. There's a shadow where the ink was lifted too early. Faint but present. It looks like your sentence is fading mid-thought, like the paper's unsure it wants to commit. So you wait again. And this time you do it right. You count, slowly. You blow gently, then stop. Because here's a fun fact, blowing on ink can backfire. Your breath contains moisture. That's right. You've been fogging your own words with humidity like a tiny human steam engine. Historians still argue whether scribes in ancient Rome used sand trays to dry ink, or whether it was just for decorative purposes. Some say the tiny trays of fine grit, pumice or crushed bone, were poured over wet writing, then brushed off gently. Instant dryness. Others claim this was more of a Renaissance innovation, or even a myth born from misinterpreted paintings. No consensus. Just speculation and grit. You try not to get any new ideas. You don't own any powdered bone. Instead, you look for movement. Air. The window. You adjust the paper near the sill, letting a breeze waft through. It's cold, but it works. The ink sets. You feel victorious, until a gust slaps the sheet off the desk and onto the floor. You pounce like a cat and lift it, relieved. No smears. But your heart? It's doing cartwheels. Time to improvise. You go full medieval. You grab a wire cooling rack from the kitchen and prop your paper on it. Instant drying station. Is it ridiculous? Absolutely. But effective. The air circulates around the sheet like a choir of invisible monks whispering. Patience, child. You glance at your stack of failed letters, each one a monument to rushed judgment. The one with the ink drop that looks like a beetle. The one you folded too soon, bleeding ink from top margin to footnote like a crime scene. The one where you blew too hard and spit accidentally. A literal spit take. And still you press on. You write again. This isn't an apology. It's a map. And now? You wait. You don't hover. You don't poke. You just observe. Let the ink breathe. You treat it like a guest. A slow, high-maintenance guest who demands the best seat in the room and at least 10 minutes of reverent silence. And in that silence, your mind wanders. You think of an odd bit of trivia. In the 1930s, German engineers tried to develop quick-drying inks for use in fountain pens that wouldn't smudge even when touched immediately. The result? Sticky, clotting sludge that gummed up pens worse than honey in winter. It wasn't until dye-based formulas evolved that quick-dry inks really caught on. Even today, gel pens promise speed and deliver frustration. Modern tech may dry faster, but it comes at a price. The soul of it disappears. There's no risk in typing, no thrill in hovering, no joy in watching ink settle like a memory forming in real time. You check your latest sentence. Dry. Perfect. You add another. I've spent too long pretending silence was strength. It shines like wet obsidian. You want to touch it so badly your fingers itch. But you resist. You distract yourself by cleaning your quill. A little rinse. A gentle pat on the blotter. Like washing a baby bird. When you return, the ink is still damp. Barely. But you know better now. You turn the candle a little closer. Not directly over, no need to roast the page. Just enough to offer warmth. Writers in the 18th century used to do this, letting candlelight speed up the drying. Risky, sure, but romantic. Entire pages dried by firelight and desperation. Some even scorched their words into permanence. Love letters turned to embers with every flick of the flame. You won't go that far. But the thought gives you a thrill. You write once more. Some truths dry faster than others. And then you leave it. No poking. No tilting. No blowing. Just stillness. And from that stillness, your words take root. They settle. They darken. They dry. You've finally learned, letting ink dry is an act of faith. And tonight you believe? You've entered the danger zone, low light. The candle flickers again, casting a golden halo across your desk. The wax pools like slow tears, and the flame stretches long, tall, and a little too enthusiastic. You squint. It's not pitch dark, not yet, but the shadows are sharpening, and the paper glows faintly like a theater stage waiting for drama. You consider lighting another candle. But you've already got one, and it feels atmospheric. You convince yourself it's part of the experience. Writing by candlelight, like a poet, a spy, or a Victorian governess with a secret. You dip your quill. The shadow of your own hand creeps across the page. This is where it begins. The light no longer reveals, it deceives. Angles shift. Strokes that look dry are actually damp. Letters blur at the edges. You squint harder. Is that a V or a U? Is that even your handwriting anymore? Then it happens. You misjudge. You lean in. Your wrist gently lands on what you thought was safe ground. You hear it, the faintest sound of paper fibers crying out as wet ink yields to pressure. You lift your hand and wince. Smudge. It's not dramatic. Not a catastrophic Rorschach. Just a small curl of black where a G used to sit proudly. Now it slumps, defeated. You want to shout, but all that comes out is a sigh that rattles the candle. It turns out, bad lighting has been ruining writing for centuries. Before electricity, scribes depended on oil lamps, torches, firelight, each with their own hazards. Soot. Flicker. Heat. Ever try writing next to a torch? Romantic, sure. Until your parchment catches a gust of flame and becomes tomorrow's regret. Historians still argue whether medieval scribes truly preferred daylight or simply feared candles. Some monasteries had entire rooms built with wide, south-facing windows for scribes to work under the pure glow of the sun. Others forbade writing after dusk altogether, not out of laziness, but because too many manuscripts were lost to flame or fatigue. And fatigue is creeping in now. Your eyes sting. You blink. The ink begins to dance. Not literally, but it feels that way. It shines, winks, dares you to keep going. You adjust your posture. You try moving the candle. The flame throws long, dramatic shadows across your words. Suddenly your sentence looks like it was written in a cave. You fetch a second candle, because fine, maybe atmosphere is overrated. As you strike the match, it flares too brightly. For a second, everything is bathed in gold, and then the room swallows it again. You light the second candle, setting it at the other side of the desk. Perfect balance. Warm. Inviting. Possibly seductive. The ink likes it. You begin again. I never hated you. I hated the silence between us. You write slowly. Not for caution now, but reverence. The candles, the ink, the page, it's become a kind of theater. You are alone, but not lonely. The shadows flicker, but they do not threaten. You're aware of your hands' movements, careful not to cross the edge of light. The quill behaves. The ink flows. For a moment, the whole world is just this sentence, and the one after it. And then the mouth returns. You didn't hear it come in. But suddenly it's there, drawn to the light like a caffeinated chaos agent. It swoops, bounces against the candle flame, panics midair, and drops. Right onto your hand. You flinch. Not dramatically, just enough to smear the final word of your sentence into a moody blur. The moth bounces onto the blotting paper, flutters in what can only be described as confused shame, and escapes through the open window. You stare at the smudge. It's forgivable. Barely. You pretend it was intentional, an aesthetic flourish. A little drama. A little reality. It reminds you of an odd but real historical quirk. In the 1700s, some aristocrats kept pet moths. Not butterflies, moths. They admired their muted colors and erratic dances around firelight. Some even trained them to land on certain surfaces with sugar dust. One notorious baron in Vienna insisted his moths landed on freshly written letters, believing it added romantic energy. You hope your moth wasn't that sophisticated. You reposition your hand, hover cautiously in the twin glow of the candles, and press on. Maybe it was never about forgiveness. Maybe we just needed to say it out loud. The ink gleams. You don't dare move. You let the air do its work, watching closely for any sparkle of wetness. You tilt your head. There's one spot that might still be damp. Or maybe that's just the candle playing tricks. Candlelight is like a charismatic liar. It flatters, warms, hides things in golden curves. But it also deceives. You decide to give it time. You pull away, slide the paper slightly out of the light, and let it rest. You begin a new page. The candles crackle softly. Outside, the wind murmurs like an old friend. Your eyes adjust to the low light. Shadows stop scaring you. The flicker becomes a rhythm. You no longer chase perfection. You write with caution, yes, but not fear. You accept the flaws. You know when the ink lies. You've learned its shimmer isn't always truth. And so you keep writing. Until the candle stutters. A waxy pop. A low flicker. Then stillness. The room grows darker. But you've already adapted. You keep writing in the soft, uneven glow. Trusting the ink. Trusting your hand. And this time, the line dries clean. The candle burns low, a puddle of wax forming a soft moat at its base. The air smells of smoke, ink, and just the slightest hint of victory. Your letter is taking shape, honest, deliberate, and perfect. You let the most recent sheet dry while you stretch your spine with a quiet groan. You've been at this for hours. Now you imagine the journey ahead. This letter, this fragile, ink-blot-scarred relic, won't simply teleport to its recipient in a velvet envelope. It'll travel. Be carried. Bent. Folded. Tucked in pockets. And along the way, there's another threat, the messenger. The postman. Or rather, the postal system throughout history, a chaotic parade of sweaty hands, weather-beaten bags, muddy boots, and horses that do not respect your heartfelt prose. You picture it now, a dusty rider galloping across a gravel road in the 1700s, leather satchel slapping against his hip, your letter bouncing inside, dangerously close to a leaky canteen and yesterday's apple core. Or maybe it's 19th century London, and your letter is wedged between wet newspapers and a half-eaten scone in a sooty postbag that smells like chimney smoke and regret. You swallow hard. That ink you labored over? It's not safe yet. Fun fact: letters in the past often arrived barely legible. Ink would blur, pages stuck together from rain, or worse, sweaty delivery men. Yes, sweat. Paper is absorbent, and there's nothing more dangerous to a heartfelt confession than human perspiration and a bumpy carriage ride. Some senders tried to protect their work by applying wax coatings or sprinkling sand over the ink before folding. Others wrapped letters in cloth, animal skin, or even slipped them into hollowed-out canes. Napoleon himself insisted on double-sealing sensitive letters, once reprimanding a courier whose pocket left an oily thumbprint on a folded report. You write another line. If this reaches you smudged, no, it wasn't my hesitation, it was the weather. Then, folding. You pause. It seems simple. Fold in thirds? Or in quarters. But fold too soon, and you'll leave ink ghosts, dark, inverted imprints on the opposite page. You remember the first time it happened, back when you thought 30 seconds was plenty of drying time. The result? A haunted sentence. Half on the right side, half echoed backwards like a clumsy shadow. This time you wait. You lay the blotting paper gently over the ink and let the candlelight do its thing. You hum. You tap the desk. You even consider writing a second letter while this one dries, like having a backup just in case the mailman decides to store your message under his armpit. Historians still argue whether the famed, lost letters of Anne Boleyn were destroyed due to political sabotage, or simple ink smudging. Some scholars claim the blotched pages were deemed unreadable and discarded. Others believe they were intercepted and altered, the blurred lines an excuse to rewrite history. Either way, one thing's clear: if your words matter, their clarity does too. You begin to prep your envelope. It's hand-folded, creased perfectly. You test it by slipping in a blank page. Smooth entry. No snagging. But then you remember, folding the letter will press its still fresh edges together. Even the tiniest damp patch becomes a smear. The fold becomes a vice. You reach for a technique once used by 18th century correspondents, the wax paper liner. A thin, oily layer that protects the folds from absorbing each other. You improvise with a scrap of non-stick parchment paper. You smile, feeling like a calligraphic MacGyver. You lay it over the writing, then fold. Slowly. One edge. Then the next. No pressing. No creasing. Just enough to fit it neatly. And now comes the next step in the letter's perilous adventure, sealing. But not yet. First, the environmental variables. You picture the postal journey of the 1600s. Letters pass from hand to hand, through couriers, inns, foot messengers, and even stranger arrangements. In Italy, some were delivered by monks on foot, others by fishmongers headed toward the same direction. In rainy seasons, parchment was wrapped in linen and tucked into saddlebags that doubled as feed pouches. And in certain coastal towns, messages were bottled, literally sealed in wine flasks and cast to sea, in hopes of reaching port cities faster than land-bound horses. Your letter? It'll go through slightly more organized systems. But even modern post isn't immune to moisture. You think of that time your package arrived soaked, its contents warped like origami left out in the rain. You wrap your letter in another layer, wax paper, folded like a pastry, and tie it loosely with thread. You pause again. Will it still smell like me? You wonder, suddenly self-conscious. The ink has a scent. The paper has one too. A mixture of dust and iron and… is that cinnamon from your fingers? You kind of hope it lingers. A quirky bit of lore. In 19th century France, it was rumored that a letter's scent could enchant the recipient more than its contents. Some women would press the page to their neck or wrists before sealing it, imbuing it with the ghost of perfume or pulse. One legendary letter from the court of Louis XV arrived at its destination with a perfectly preserved lipstick mark on the fold. No words, just a kiss. Still debated whether it was a prank or a secret message. You're not that bold. But you do breathe onto the paper. Just once. Just enough to say, "This was mine." Now folded. Protected. Ready. You lay the letter gently beside the others. One down. More to go. But in that moment, you realize, smudging isn't just about the ink. It's about what comes after the ink, too. And tonight, you've outsmarted the postman. You feel triumphant, your letter folded, protected, unblemished. But as you reach for the next page, something else catches your eye. A strange, crinkled square tucked beneath a pile of abandoned drafts. You pull it free. Blotting paper. Not just any scrap, either. This one is old, faintly yellowed, soft around the edges. There's a ghost of a previous letter imprinted on it, partial words, mirrored and faded. You tilt it toward the candlelight and see. "Darling, forgive yours." A mystery preserved in reverse. You smile. This flimsy square may be the unsung hero of your entire night. Blotting paper, the original lifesaver. You pick it up reverently. It's lightweight, unassuming. You press it gently to the newest sentence you just wrote. "I waited because I was afraid of what waiting would prove." The paper lifts smoothly, like a kiss goodnight. No smudge. No drag. Just a subtle dulling of the ink's shine, a sign that it's absorbing excess moisture, leaving the rest intact. Blotting paper has existed in some form since the 15th century. Originally made from offcuts of cotton paper too soft or too porous for writing, it soon gained fame for one simple virtue: it prevented disaster. By the 19th century, everyone from schoolboys to statesmen kept blotting books at their side. Some even had silver-framed holders, monogrammed pads, or rotating blotters shaped like rolling pins, desk toys for the literate elite. Napoleon Bonaparte reportedly kept a monogrammed blotting pad on his campaign desk. He believed a clean dispatch could sway a diplomat more than 1,000 cannons. "A blurred letter," he once remarked, according to dubious legend, "is a blurred mind." Whether he actually said it or someone just wrote it for drama, the idea stuck. You write again, emboldened. "I thought if I never sent this, it could never be misunderstood." Then you pause. Gently you press the blotting paper again, firm, steady, a small ritual of protection. The ghost of your sentence doesn't transfer. The ink is set. Clean. You feel a rush of pride. But blotting isn't foolproof. You flip the sheet and notice a faint stain, a reminder of past mistakes. You'd once blotted too soon, pressed too hard, and ended up transferring wet ink from one page to the next, creating a mirrored disaster like a clumsy stamp. Historians still argue whether certain ink smears found on love letters in the 1700s were accidental, or intentional. Some suggest that visible blotches were added to convey urgency or emotion. Others think lovers simply didn't care about smudges if the words were sincere. There's a museum in Vienna that proudly displays a letter from a soldier to his fiancée with 3 fingerprints and a coffee ring. It's protected in glass. People line up to see it. You touch your own blotting paper, wondering what impressions it now holds. It's like a diary of mistakes and almost mistakes. Of saved pages and rescued loops. You consider tucking it inside your journal, preserving it like a petal pressed between pages. Then an idea. You tear a piece of blotting paper and slide it between the folds of your letter, just for good measure. A little secret insurance. A soft promise. Stay dry. Stay legible. And just like that, you understand the real function of this tool. It's not just about drying ink. It's about control. It's about ensuring that what you wrote, however messy it felt at the time, arrives intact. No misunderstandings. No misreadings. No accidental second meanings courtesy of a stray drip. A quirky anecdote surfaces in your memory. In Victorian times, some schools banned blotting paper in handwriting exams. They believed it allowed students to write sloppily and fix it later, essentially an analog form of cheating. Proper penmanship, they claimed, required firm resolve, a steady hand, and a perfect page. Sounds noble. Also sounds like a very efficient way to produce nervous breakdowns at age 10. You write another line. I'm not sure if this will reach you, but I needed to write it anyway. This time, no hesitation. You press the blotter like a pro. Hold. Release. Clean. Your confidence is growing. You find yourself slipping into a rhythm. Quill, sentence, blot. Quill, sentence, blot. It's musical. Meditative. Like a breath between thoughts. You feel less like you're writing a letter and more like you're conducting a quiet symphony of ink and intention. Still, the page is fragile. One misstep, one lazy smear, and all your work dissolves into blur. You think of those cursed moments in the past, when the ink lifted too easily, or when it smeared across the fold because you trusted it too soon. But now you have a new rule: blot every page every time. Even if it looks dry. Trust nothing. You glance at your desk and realize something astonishing: no fresh smudges. No new casualties. Just pages. Quiet. Waiting. Whole. You pick up one of the earlier sheets, carefully, and hold it to the candlelight. The ink has dried to a deep matte finish. You can see where the blotter kissed it. There's a faint impression. A silent record of preservation. You love it. You write a final line for the night. I'll leave this in the hands of time and postage. You set the quill down. Blot. Press. Lift. Perfect. You smile. Tonight, Napoleon would be proud. You wake from a micro-daydream, fingers still curled around the edge of your now-dried page. A half-smile lingers on your face. No smudges. No smears. You blink slowly, eyes adjusting to the amber glow of the candles, and realize something has changed. You're feeling sentimental. It sneaks in when you least expect it. The act of writing, of dragging emotion from your chest and setting it on paper, has opened a door. And now your thoughts wander to what kinds of letters survive the ink gauntlet, not just intact, but immortal. Love letters. The battlefield of ink-stained longing. You pull a fresh sheet toward you. Not hurried. Reverent. The weight of old romance hovers in the room like perfume from a coat long since hung away. You dip your quill, and the thought forms before the ink hits the page. I would have said this aloud, but I didn't trust my voice. You know that feeling. That pulse. And you know it's been felt before. During World War I, entire bundles of love letters traveled across Europe, carried in satchels and jacket linings, tucked in boot soles and sewn into collars. Rain, mud, and blood couldn't always be kept out, but writers tried. Soldiers would coat their envelopes in candle wax or wrap their messages in oilcloth, praying they'd reach someone intact. Of course, ink was no match for grief or time. Many of these letters arrived with blurred words, ink melted by tears or battlefield weather. One surviving example, now housed in a war museum in Belgium, includes a simple sentence. If it's smudged, it's because I miss you before I finished writing. The ink trail? Faint. Slanted. Broken in places. But devastatingly clear in intent. You pause, staring at your page. You think of those who wrote with urgency, hands shaking from cold or fear or sheer emotion. How many letters never arrived? How many became waterlogged memories trapped in some abandoned satchel? Historians still argue whether one particularly smeared letter found on a battlefield in 1916 was an authentic love confession or propaganda planted by officers to boost morale. The letter reads, "You are the sun I fight under." Romantic, yes. But convenient? Perhaps. The ink is smeared beyond repair in the lower corner, just enough to obscure the name. Was that real emotion, or strategic heartbreak? Either way, the smudge has power. You write another line. I don't know what you'll think of this, but I needed you to feel it. The ink gleams. You reach for the blotting paper and hesitate. Not out of laziness, but because the shimmer is beautiful. Suspended, fragile, like emotion freshly exhaled. You wait 5 seconds, then 10. Then you gently lay the blotter over it and press. Clean. Some lovers, desperate to prevent damage, included drying instructions in the letter itself. Read this near the fire. One note from 1892 instructed. But not too near. The words are shy and don't like heat. Others advised. Wait a full hour before unfolding, or my heart might smear across the paper. You feel like those might have been half jokes, half spells. You let your thoughts meander to the idea of tears, literal ones. A romantic cliché, but real nonetheless. You remember once, long ago, writing a note of apology. Not a love letter, exactly, but something close. You cried mid-sentence. A single drop hit the ink and bloomed like a flower. You watched it grow, a black-petaled confession. You didn't rewrite the page. You sent it. You let the smudge speak. You write now. This paper has soaked up more than ink. And indeed it has. Your fingerprints. Your pulse. The breath from your mouth as you whispered the words aloud. This letter, like all the others before it, carries you in more ways than one. Quirky tidbit, during the Civil War, American soldiers carried farewell letters in their breast pockets, unfinished, unsent messages meant for mothers, wives, sweethearts. Some were found years later, the ink faded, the paper brittle. One letter, folded against a soldier's chest, bore a perfect brown thumbprint over the word home. Preserved by pressure, sweat, and proximity to a human heart. You gently press your blotter again, even though the line is likely dry. It's become a reflex now. A superstition. A promise. The quill glides smoother now. You no longer overthink each stroke. You've learned its balance, its voice. You understand how it likes to be dipped, how the ink clings, how the drying behaves depending on pressure and warmth. You write. This letter is the sound of my silence breaking. The wax candle flares softly, casting long shadows that flicker like old film reels. The atmosphere feels cinematic. You imagine your recipient receiving this, hands trembling, not from cold, but anticipation. You hope they run their fingers over the page and feel the slight indentations where your pressure deepened. The places where your emotion pressed harder than your pen. You stack the finished page on top of the others. You smooth it gently, not like an object, but a living thing. This is a letter written with everything you had to give. Ink. Emotion. Fear. Restraint. Time. And blotting paper, that humble companion, has captured every word without protest. You lean back in your chair. You stare at your hands. Ink-stained. Tired. Proud. You haven't just written tonight. You've confessed. And it didn't smudge. You flex your fingers, now faintly tinged with the noble blue-black hue of iron gall ink, and crack your knuckles in slow satisfaction. The letter stacked before you feels sacred. But as you eye the last pristine sheet of paper, a new task looms. Sealing. You could just fold it neatly, slip it into an envelope, and call it a night. But something in you hesitates. That's not how this letter ends, not this one. This one deserves a seal. A proper, wax hand stamp, hear ye seal. You reach into the drawer and pull out a modest stick of red sealing wax, the kind that looks like lipstick but behaves like lava. You find your old metal stamp, initials engraved on the end like a tiny brand. It's cool to the touch, indifferent to your nerves. You've done this before. You know the drill. Heat the wax. Let it melt. Drip precisely. Press the stamp gently. Wait. But you also know what can go wrong. You light a fresh match. The smell of sulfur curls into the candlelight. You hold the wax above the flame and feel it begin to soften, sag, surrender. Then drip. A plop of red lands right where you want it, centered, slightly above the fold. Perfect. Then another. You resist the urge to tilt the page or blow. You've already learned, movement is the enemy of drying ink and wax. Here it is again. That theme. The waiting. The restraint. You lower the stamp. Softly. Like kissing a sleeping animal. And you wait. 10 seconds. 15. You lift. And it's crooked. Not ruinously so. But slanted. Just enough to make the entire thing feel like it's shrugging. Like your letter is saying, close enough. You exhale. You consider reheating the wax, starting over. But you remember a charming detail from history. In the 18th century, the tilt of a seal was sometimes intentional. A slanted seal might signal informality, or a whisper of secrecy. Lovers tilted their seals to say, "This is not for anyone else." Some historians even suggest revolutionaries used angled seals to mark their letters as urgent, or dangerous. Historians still argue whether a collection of slanted sealed French letters from 1792 were a signal for political alliance, or just the work of a very clumsy courier. But either way, the mystery lives on in the tilt. You decide to leave it. You write the name of your recipient on the outside, the ink flowing like you've finally earned its respect. Then, just for good measure, you tie the letter with a piece of twine. A bow. A token. A quiet nod to every parchment ever sent through storm and sweat. You remember another story. In ancient Rome, letters were sometimes sealed with dough. Yes, actual dough. Soft bread paste pressed with a signet, then baked slightly over flame. The idea was that tampering would be obvious. If someone tried to read your letter without permission, they'd crumble the seal like an overcooked biscuit. Not elegant, but clever. Still, your wax feels more romantic. You hold the finished envelope up to the candlelight and turn it slowly, inspecting it from every angle. It's not perfect. The edges are soft. The seal's off-center. There's a faint fingerprint near the bottom where your hand trembled ever so slightly while writing the salutation. But it's real. You whisper, "Let this carry what I couldn't say out loud." Then you imagine the moment of reception. The person on the other end, holding this in their hands, tearing through the twine, cracking the wax, unfolding the page, and there, reading you. Not the polished, edited version of you, but the handwritten, ink-stained truth. That's what a seal does. It isn't just security. It's symbolism. Finality. You're no longer tinkering. This letter is done. Alive. Launched. Quirky tidbit. Queen Elizabeth I had a personal wax blend infused with rose oil and gold dust. Her sealed letters were unmistakable. The scent lingered, and the glitter glinted in torchlight. Even her enemies paused to admire them. Probably before throwing them into the fire. You don't have rose oil. But you do have the ghost of cinnamon from your fingers. You press the wax with your thumb for one last touch. It's still slightly warm. It accepts the print. A signature in skin. Then you do something rare. You talk to the letter. Softly. You know what to do. Because honestly, by now, it feels like the paper might actually listen. You place the finished piece atop the growing stack and lean back in your chair, arms folded, head tilted toward the ceiling. The candlelight dances across the room, casting shadows like stage curtains pulling slowly closed. You've sealed something more than paper tonight. You've sealed a moment. A memory. A risk. And for once, nothing smudged. You sit still for a moment, staring at your ink-stained fingers and the sealed letter on the table, and for the first time tonight, you let yourself feel smug. Not giddy. Not boastful. Just a quiet, well-earned smugness. You've fought the ink. You've mastered the blotter. You even sealed your letter with enough flourish to make a tutor courtier nod approvingly. But then, you remember something, an old, annoying truth that crawls up from memory like a stray footnote. You're left-handed. And you've just been lucky. Because while your dominant hand hasn't sabotaged you tonight, it certainly has in the past. And now, the ghost of every smudge-ridden school assignment, every mirrored ink smear along your pinky's edge, rises to the surface like a warning bell. Lefties, throughout history, have been cursed in calligraphy. You look down at your hand. The underside of your palm is still smudged faintly black, not from tonight, but from the hundreds of letters and notes that came before. Even now, the edge of your hand tingles slightly, haunted by pressure and friction. You smile bitterly. Because the truth is, left-handed people weren't just forgotten in the great tradition of penmanship, they were punished. Teachers forced students to switch hands. Desks were designed for right-handed writing flow. Ink pots? Placed on the right. Every aspect of classic writing assumes your dominant hand stays clear of wet ink. But not you. You write over it. You drag your hand through it. You smear your own eloquence. Historians still argue whether Leonardo da Vinci's mirror writing was for secrecy, vanity, or just a brilliant left-hander working around the limitations of medieval ink. Some scholars think he mirrored his words to keep from smearing. Others say he enjoyed the mystery. But every left-handed writer since has raised an eyebrow and muttered, "Respect." You grab a new sheet and hesitate. Do you adjust your angle? Turn the page? Try that awkward hook hand posture you used in school, the one that made your handwriting look like an earthquake in cursive? You decide to adjust the page, tilt in. G it sharply, almost diagonally. Now your hand doesn't hover over the fresh ink. It glides beside it. The angle feels ridiculous, like you're trying to sign a check on a wall. But hey, whatever works. You write slowly. Even now, I adjust myself for the world. Each word is an act of rebellion. Not just because you're writing against the right-handed current of history, but because you're writing with precision and care. Deliberately. Cleanly. And somehow, your left hand doesn't interfere. It behaves. You look down and realize your pinky is hovering, trained by years of accidental destruction. A dancer raised above the stage. You grin? You've evolved. This is survival. Left-handed calligraphers existed, of course. But they were rare. Manuals from the 1700s and 1800s barely mention them, except as an oddity. A curiosity. Some advised them to sit at special angles or write backward. Others recommended training the non-dominant hand. One French instructor even claimed that left-handedness could be cured with discipline and proper pens. A quirky story? In the 1950s, a Japanese stationery company released a limited edition set of left-handed friendly ink pens. They failed. Why? The ink dried too slowly. Reviews were filled with furious smears. Ironically, they were discontinued due to complaints from, wait for it, left-handed users. You write again. I was taught that neatness meant conformity. I chose clarity instead. You watch the ink dry. Slowly. A few blots you catch with the edge of your old friend, the blotting paper. No panic. Just precision. You think of other left-handers. Writers. Artists. Musicians. Some of the world's most brilliant minds, Beethoven, Mark Twain, Jimi Hendrix, all had to work around the rules. They didn't fit the system. So they bend it. You feel that now. Not in an epic, revolutionary way, but in a quiet, candlelit one. You've bent the page to suit your hand. You've angled your tools. You've trained your fingers not to destroy what you create. And maybe that's the secret. Smudge-free writing isn't about submission. It's about adaptation. Your fingers ache slightly from hovering. Your wrist throbs. But the page? Pristine. You smile, not because it's easy, but because it wasn't. You worked for this. You earned it. You finished the line. This letter is not perfect. But it is mine. You place it gently with the others, your hand lifting just a breath above the drying ink. You don't touch. You don't hover. You wait. And as it dries, you give your left hand a little nod. A thanks. You've done enough for one night. You roll your wrist in a slow circle and glance down at the growing pile of letters, each one unique, deliberate, and miraculously free of fresh smudges. You've won more battles than you expected tonight. But now your mind drifts beyond your desk, beyond your ink-stained fingers, to a strange and almost embarrassing thought. What if none of this lasts? What if all these careful loops and flourishes, all this ritual and reverence, fades? You've seen it before. Old documents, some famous, some forgotten, where the ink has turned to ghosts. Letters with names you can't quite read, entire pages that look like they've been half erased by time. Smudged not by clumsy hands, but by the slow, cruel breath of history itself. Ink fades? That's the next enemy. You reach for an old letter tucked in the back of a drawer, something you wrote years ago, folded and sealed but never sent. The ink's still there, mostly, but the edges have dulled. The once bold black has slumped into brown. You run your finger along the curve of a lowercase e, and feel the faintest texture of dried pigment. You wonder if, one day, even this touch will erase it. Historians, of course, have been trying to fight this for centuries. Manuscripts from ancient Egypt to the Ottoman Empire were often copied by hand every few generations, not just to preserve the words, but to counteract the fading. A page might last 80 years. A message, if reborn in a fresh hand, might live forever. But not every letter gets copied. Some just disappear. You write another line. I don't know if these words will survive, but I wrote them like they might. The ink glows, alive for now. Then comes a sobering thought. What if someone tries to read this 100 years from now, and can't? Historians still argue whether a cache of letters found in a sealed English attic in 1911 belonged to a single woman or were scraps of different correspondences. The ink was faded, some letters half gone. The names were blurred, the dates unreadable. One researcher claimed he could smell the past more than he could see it. You pause. What does your letter smell like? Ink. Wax. Paper. Maybe the faint scent of your skin, cinnamon and thyme. You write again. I wrote this slowly, so it could be read slowly. Then you examine your tools. The ink, iron gall, is notorious for both longevity and destruction. That's right. It burns. While it etches into paper, anchoring itself into the fibers, it also corrodes over time. Centuries-old manuscripts often bear holes where the ink has eaten through the parchment. Beautiful sentences, carefully penned, and mid-thought, lost to their own chemistry. You once saw a museum exhibit of medieval prayer books with entire pages crumbling around the words. The script floated on gaps like stars over a black void. The irony? The more passionate the writer, the more ink they used. And the faster it died. You reach for your blotting paper, now soft with use, and gently pat your newest line. You imagine those molecules, trapped in time, hardening just enough to linger, but not so much that they consume the page beneath. A quirky side note: in 1845, a chemist named Gottlieb Faber attempted to create a forever ink. His prototype involved a mix of indigo, powdered bone, and honey. It was wildly unsuccessful, attracting ants and melting in humidity, but one of his letters is still visible today, preserved under glass in a Bavarian archive. Historians don't know what it says. Why? Because the ants chewed off half the paper. You grin? You add a final line to this page. If this page crumbles, I hope one word remains. You hold it to the light. The letters are intact. Sharp. Confident. For now. You lay it carefully atop the others, making sure no page rests too snugly against another. Pressure can ruin even the most disciplined ink. And what's worse, time doesn't smudge with flair. It fades. It eats. It forgets. You look at your stack of letters and wonder who might try to read them decades from now. If the ink will still hold. If the seal will still cling. If your handwriting, so carefully shaped tonight, will even be legible. Maybe. Maybe not. But you wrote them anyway. Not because they'll last. But because they meant something while they were still wet. You stretch your legs beneath the desk, muscles stiff from stillness. The candle has grown short, flame tiny but persistent, just like you. Only 2 sheets remain in your stack. 2 chances to say everything you haven't. You reach for one slowly, mindful of every motion. By now, even your breath feels measured. You dip your quill. The ink clings just right, like it's gotten to know you. Like it trusts you. You begin to write. I never expected to write all of this. But I'm glad I did. It flows easily. You no longer pause after every loop or worry about an accidental drip. The ink dries faster now, not because the air has changed, but because you have. You've adapted. You've become patient. Balanced. You've come far from the clumsy beginnings, smudging your first sentence, recutting rogue quills, fighting sweat, trick lighting, and wax drama. And yet, the danger hasn't disappeared. It's just quieter now. More refined. Sophisticated. Take modern pens, for example. You think about them with a sudden flicker of suspicion. Gel pens, ballpoints, fountain pens, they all promise ease. Efficiency. Clean lines, no waiting. But do they really eliminate smudging? Or do they just accelerate your mistakes? You remember a moment, last year maybe, when you dashed off a quick birthday card using a fancy, fast-drying gel pen. You signed your name with flair, slid the card into its envelope, and dropped it off. 2 hours later, the recipient texted, "Loved the card. But what happened to your name? Looked like you blacked it out for security reasons." You wince at the memory. Modern pens, despite all their promises, are still tools in fallible hands. And fast drying doesn't mean instantaneous. One misjudged touch, one distracted fold, and your, with love, becomes a smear resembling with lard. Historians still argue whether the supposed great signature glitch in the 1969 moon landing guestbook was due to a faulty pen or a rushed astronaut. Buzz Aldrin's autograph appears smudged, slanted, and half missing. NASA claims it was the pen. Pen manufacturers, not surprisingly, blame low gravity. Scholars have yet to agree. You keep writing. Maybe writing slowly is the only honest way left to communicate. A little dramatic, maybe. But the sentiment rings true. There's something inherently respectful about writing like this. Every word you pen is a commitment. There's no backspace here. No spell check. Every mistake becomes a part of the story. Even now, with newer tools at your disposal, you're choosing the harder path. The ancient tools. The messy ones. The human ones. You pause and reach for a modern pen out of curiosity. A smooth, matte black rollerball you keep in a drawer for scribbles and grocery lists. You test it on a scrap page. It glides. Easy. Quick. Predictable. And then you swipe your finger across it. Smear. You smirk. Not even half a second passed, and your line now looks like it was sneezed upon. It's a gentle reminder, ink will always punish impatience, no matter the century. You set the rollerball down and pick up your quill again. It feels weightless now. Familiar. A dance partner that finally lets you lead. Quirky fact, in the 1970s, a German stationery company tried to release a pen that would alert users when the ink was too wet to touch, via a tiny color-changing window near the tip. The concept was brilliant. The execution? Hilarious. People stared at the window instead of the ink, ignored the real drying time, and still smudged everything. The product was quietly discontinued 6 months later. You write your next line with a smile. I think smudges are just thoughts we touch too soon. The candle flickers again. You adjust it slightly, noticing how steady your hand has become. You haven't flinched in over an hour. No sudden moves. No impulsive gestures. This process has reshaped your body's rhythm. You exhale, soft and warm, careful not to fog the ink. You lay the blotting paper down without a second thought. A habit now. A grace. Then you do something bold. You write the next sentence without checking the ink even once. I forgive myself for the messy drafts. You don't hover. You don't second guess. You trust the paper, the ink, your timing. You let the blotting paper press. You lift it. The words remain. Whole. Clear. No hesitations etched in shadow. You look at the scrap you tested the modern pen on, still smudged. Still impatient. You chuckle. You write again. If you read this without smears, you'll know how much I cared. And you mean it. Every dry word is proof of your effort. Not just in what you said, but in how carefully you said it. Every line is a balance between honesty and restraint. You place this page atop the others. It sits like it belongs there. A perfect part of an imperfect series. A chapter in an inked confession. One sheet remains. One page left. You pick it up like it's glass. Not out of fear, but reverence. All that's left is closure. Not the dramatic kind with violins and tearful farewells, but the quiet kind, like turning off a lamp or exhaling at the end of a long story. The candle is a stub now. It flickers with the shakiness of something nearing its final breath. The shadows it casts are longer, softer. Everything feels slower, like the room itself is sinking gently into sleep. You dip the quill again, the ink swirling with one last ribbon of movement. You don't rush. This is the lap around the garden before heading in for the night. You write. This page doesn't carry anything new, just everything that's left. It's not poetic. It's not clever. But it's true. And you've earned the right to write plainly. The ink flows cleanly, evenly. You've calibrated your pressure, your angle, your expectations. Every movement feels natural now. You don't think about smudging, not because you've forgotten, but because you've absorbed the risk into your rhythm. You reflect not just on this letter, but on every letter that came before. Some were messy. Some were late. Some were never sent. You wonder about the ones you'll never get to read, the ones that faded in drawers or vanished in the folds of time. Ink that never dried because the hands holding it trembled too much. Or waited too little. Historians still argue whether a famous smudged letter from Abraham Lincoln, written hastily during wartime, was botched by nerves or environment. The smear runs across the line. We are still uncertain, and some believe the ink itself made the message eternal. The uncertainty literally captured mid-flow, fixed in blur. You write again. I've been uncertain too. But tonight the ink knew what to do. You smile. It's not the kind of line you'd brag about. But it's real. Honest. Which, after all this, is the only kind of writing worth preserving. You take a moment to look at your hand. It's tired. The joints ache. The nails are stained. But your fingers move without panic now. You've stopped flinching at your own mistakes. You stretch your wrist and write again, slower this time. I think I wrote this to myself as much as to you. You wait for the ink to dry. But now, waiting doesn't feel like a pause. It feels like punctuation. A slow period at the end of something long and meaningful. A quirky fact crosses your mind. The poet John Keats wrote his final letters with trembling hands while dying of tuberculosis in Rome. Many of his last notes were smudged, not from haste, but from fevered effort. His script got smaller, more fragile. But he kept writing. Even as his body failed, the ink held. There's something devastatingly beautiful in that. You run your hand over the dried surface of your last line. It feels warm. Smooth. Solid. You close with. If this letter fades, I hope someone reads between the lines. You reach for the envelope. Fold gently. No sudden movements. A final press of the seal. No drama this time, just closure. You place the letter on top of the others. A small mountain of thought, emotion, and slowly dried ink. You lean back. The candle gives one last flicker. Everything's done. Nothing smudged. And now, you let the silence settle. You sit back in your chair, letting the candle burn down to its last inch. The warm light trembles gently on your desk, casting faint shadows of your quill, your fingers, and the seal that still holds firm across your envelope stack. The ink is dry. The letters are safe. The chaos of smudges, spills, and second guesses, all behind you. Your breathing slows as you look at what you've created. Maybe it won't last forever. Maybe time will eat away at the edges, fade the pigment, yellow the pages. But tonight, in this soft, golden hour, the ink held. Your hand steadied. The words came. And isn't that enough? You remember the messes that didn't make it. The pages you tore, the letters you burned, the thoughts you crumpled. But somehow, through patience, a bit of luck, and a lot of very quiet breathing, something made it through untouched. You reach over and gently snuff out the candle. The smoke spirals upward, slow and thin, like a thread pulling your story closed. It's quiet now. Just you. And dry ink. Maybe tomorrow, someone will read your words. Maybe they won't. But tonight they exist. Clearly. Calmly. Entirely yours. Sleep well, you careful writer. The page is safe.